Okay. So my name is Pete Van Leer. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'm a researcher with Policy Matters Ohio. We're a nonpartisan think tank focused on research, coalition building, communications, and advocacy here in Ohio. So I live in the city of Cleveland, where what we call care response or non-police response for people experiencing mental and behavioral health crises. They just launched the program this month, a pilot in my zip code, actually. And so I saw a care response car in my neighborhood over the weekend. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing how that develops over the coming year and continue to advocate for ways to make sure it's effective. So we've been doing, as Policy Matters, we've been doing research and advocacy community emergency response for several years now. I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. And one great thing about tonight is that we're bringing together some very different community response programs for this dialogue. And I think that's important because each program, while taking different approaches, is really part of thinking about how we can best keep our communities safer with a community response in all kinds of different situations. So you'll hear from everybody tonight who's here from different cities, from Cincinnati, from Dayton, from Shaker Heights, and from Cleveland, and also from March for Our Lives with a different perspective, sort of a policy lens. So that's all I'm going to say. I want us to get started and not waste too much time. So I'm going to introduce Leah Bevis, who will introduce herself, and she's going to moderate the first part of our panel. Take it away, Leah.
Yeah, thanks. Um, so my name is Leah Bevis. I'm a professor at Ohio State University. And I was asked to moderate not because I really have any very particular expertise, but I have been doing some work recently on evaluating the impact of police response to behavioral health crises in Columbus, Ohio, as well as really trying to bring community voice into that evaluation and sort of asking Columbus communities like what they would like to see in terms of response for mental health or substance related crises. And that's been super interesting. I'm not going to be talking about that much here, but one of the key things that came out of that large multidisciplinary project is that we have a lot of people in Columbus who would love to see a non-police crisis response, like some form of non-police crisis response. And the groups here are representing sort of versions of sometimes, to some extent working with police or totally working without police, but really alternative, cutting edge, like cool programs doing response, not necessarily for behavioral health, but for a variety of needs in Ohio. So I'm really excited to hear what all the panelists say. And I wanted to make one more note because I'm actually going to leave at 7 and pass this to Pete to finish. So Columbus Safety Collective is an advocacy group here in Columbus that's been specifically working on advocacy around non-police crisis response. If you're interested in working with us, I'm a professor and I'm also a member of the Safety Collective. If you as a listener are like, yeah, like that's my thing too. I really want to think about this in Columbus, or if you're inspired by this panel and you want to talk about policy work, I'll put my email in the chat. You can reach out to me and, get connected to the Columbus Safety Collective. Okay, so I'm now going to pass it off to all the panelists who are basically just going to do a very short sort of group bio to introduce the group that they are talking with. And I just remind you guys, like for the audience members, maybe give them the type of calls that you guys are responding to, as well as the type of responders who are going to meet those who are in need, as well as maybe a little bit of information on sort of how you work within the broader structure of first response, whether you're partnering with police or not, or, whether you're part of the 911 system or not, et cetera. And so I think we can start with Bill and Iris with the Cincinnati Alternative Response Program. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you. Bill, do you mind if I go first and then you can pull it up from the rear? So my name is Iris Rowley. I am an original member of the Cincinnati Black United Front. In the year of 2001, we sued the city, the FOP, and the police for alleging racial profiling. It is out of that complete process that we have two agreements that I don't think anyone in the country has outside of maybe Minneapolis. To help determine how we could police better with transparency and build public safety. And so part of our strategy and thought is always to remove police from spaces that they were not. But through what we use in Cincinnati called problem solving using Sarah, we've been able to determine how we could do that. And all of the work that we've been doing for the past 24 years, it'll be 25 years next month. And so for the past 2.5 years, I've been serving in the role as consultant to the city manager and police chief on all things policing. And so we've been pushing for something like this in the city of Cincinnati, but I guess the heavens had not aligned and Bill Vidra hadn't made it to Cincinnati in the ECC department. And now that's what we have. And Bill, please take it away from there.
All right, thank you, Iris. My name is Bill Vidra. I'm the director of a city department called Emergency Communications Center, or ECC. So in Cincinnati, 911, 311 is a standalone city department rather than a part of a police department or fire department. And in addition to running what people would think of as 911 and that operation, call taking and dispatching, as part of my department also is our alternative response programming and our partnership with another organization to provide co-response with police officers. So just kind of broadly looking at 911 here and everywhere, a challenge for 911 for a long time has been not having enough tools in the toolbox of a 911 center to apply to all the types of emergencies and non-emergencies that are reported. We're in a role of taking in requests for services and then needing to apply some type of service to that request that we receive. Sometimes people call in and they ask for a particular type of help. Other times, and sometimes that is or isn't an appropriate kind of help that they're asking for based on what's happening. Most of the time, people are just telling us what's happening, and they're trusting and expecting that we are going to apply the right kind of help to that situation. But most 911 centers have very few tools in their toolbox. They have police cars and fire trucks and ambulances, and that's pretty much it. And they have to throw one of those or multiple of those things at every problem that is reported to them. And, I think we can all agree that sometimes sending the wrong kind of help to a situation could make that situation worse. And so 911 has always and forever needed more tools than those that I listed there. And that's where alternative response, co-response, things like that fit in to have a broader continuum of services, whether that's for crisis or any kind of situation. Having more tools that have more specific training, higher levels of training can mean that we're able to get a better kind or the best kind of help to someone, which is very important. We've been using co-response in Cincinnati for many decades now, and really proud that looking at where some parts of the country are trying to start that up, that's been here for a long time, and that's thanks to a lot of the work that Iris talked about, going decades back, trying to improve how our police department responds to situations. We have a mobile crisis team in Cincinnati that we're partnered with, that we send as a co-responder with police to high-risk crisis situations. But what we created in 2022 was an alternative response program. So in addition to that, we looked for lower level crisis situations where it was safe to send someone other than police, and took police completely out of that equation and send what we call ARC, or the Alternative Response to Crisis team instead. We started with one team, so you can think of it as the equivalent of one police car that we were deploying to things reported to 911. And we have, through data and studying how things have gone, we're able to advocate for and get budgeted a second team. So we have 2 ARC teams now. And I imagine that will probably continue. We've seen that there's a need 24/7 for this type of alternative response in Cincinnati, and it's finding ways to scale it and fund it is really my challenge ahead. That team and now 2 teams on the street have taken thousands of calls over the last 2 years at this point that would have been handled by police historically. And there's a clinician that's part of that team, and it's all about connection to services for folks. We are about to expand alternative response in Cincinnati with kind of a companion initiative that's really focused on non-crisis calls. So the ARC team is handling situations where someone is having a mental or behavioral crisis, where they're needing connection related to housing or food insecurity. And there are a whole other set of calls that police are handling, like assisting someone whose car is broken down on the side of the road. Just making sure people are safe when there's been a fender bender. And we're booting up a alternative response program called Community Responders that will work in just the same way as our ARC program, but take some of those non-crisis calls for police service in Cincinnati. And that should be up and running by the end of this calendar year. So very excited about that. I think we'll stop there.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I think, Annette, did you want to give us an overview of your program next?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
I have a PowerPoint, so let's hopefully this all goes well, but we shall find out. Okay. So my name is Annette Amistadi Wallace. I'm certain I had a name change. And so I am making sure I share that now in my professional career. For those who've changed their name, it's quite difficult. So today I am just here to talk about the First Call program, which started here in the city of Shaker Heights, a suburb in Cleveland, and has now expanded across other suburban communities. Here's just a little bit of demographic. We serve about 119,000 residents for our 5 communities, and each 5 of these communities are their own standing municipality. They have their own police department, fire department, city council, mayors, and all of those things. And so bringing together those 5 communities to operate one team that is seamless of going in and out of each of those jurisdictions and able to work in the day. They usually work in multiple jurisdictions because that's just what we have. And so our program is in hybrid between an alternative response and a co-response model. We're able to go to those calls that come into the 911 center that have some of those criteria markers for either violence or a crime or something that was needed, and it's still needed for a police or fire response. But we're able to go to those calls as well as the alternative. Going to the calls that come in that are eligible for the nonviolent or non-criminal offenses or things that are going on in that person's life that they just need assistance, as well as going to those calls that have no mental health component to them at all. Just, Bill had mentioned, the program that's going on in Cincinnati of addressing the neighbor that calls in because they can't get their washer to work, or they, are having car problems. That doesn't require police or fire, but it's not typical of a mental health professional's kind of their scope. But, we're able to go to those calls as well and help the neighbors out that call into the dispatch center because they just don't know who else to call. Our program works with both police and fire departments. So we're seeing an increase. There's an initiative up here called Community Paramedicine, where they're sending a paramedic to certain calls instead of the whole fire truck and ambulance and all of that. They're sending just one paramedic to handle a physical health need if that's needed. And we're kind of fitting into that dynamic a little bit, as well as just the regular fire department calls. We modeled our program after the concept of this idea of mutual aid, that all of the 5 of our municipalities that we work with already share resources. I use the example of like a SWAT team. They all pay to have a SWAT team, but they don't use it often. And it's that concept of how can we cost share and how do we make this work across multiple municipalities and share a resource that they're going to use a lot more often than they do their mobile field force and things like that. You know, we're in their community going to calls several times in a day, and they only might use their SWAT teams one time a year. You know, some of the communities barely even use it. So that's how we kind of came up with that concept, as well as each of these 5 municipalities share a regional dispatch center. So they all share that dispatch center to, or they all share that dispatch center. So they're all, the call takers are all in the same building, and there's different radio channels and all of that, but they're all in that same building. And that was also developed after that concept of cost sharing, because each of them before had their own dispatch center, and that just was not cost effective for the cities. We also share a jail, like all of our communities share a jail. There's a lot more that feed into the jail and things like that. But again, we all came together. So our teams, I have 3 teams that cover the 5 municipalities. I use a licensed mental health clinician, so either a social worker or a counselor, and then I also use peer supports as my teams. And then I also put a clinician inside of our dispatch center. And so we're really a hybrid of kind of a lot of different levels that I know there's lots of amazing programs that touch one or multiple of these, but we're really just kind of a hybrid of all of them. Our funding, so right now we are funded for 2 years, and we are majority grant funding. We are able to get a federal grant through the COPS office, and that really started us off. I find that usually once you get a grant, it kind of all kicks in after that. So we were very fortunate to get that for our first grant. We also have our Adams board, so our mental health and addiction board here in the county. We have the county itself that was able to contribute money. We have the George Gunn Foundation, and we also have a pending grant that I got the confirmation that we got it, but I just don't have the final word that we have it, from a state grant from the mayor's office, the SKIP grant. So very excited about that. And then also our municipalities do contribute a small amount of money for these first 2 years. And we have like this big long formula that someone who's good at math, that I am not good at math, figured out. And that's how we have it kind of moving forward in regards to our sustainability for our funding and ongoing for this program, and as well as applying for grants, because grants are amazing. And then I just threw in some data. So our expansion into the 5 communities really just started in June. And so it's been very new for our communities. There's a lot of education going out for our communities. There's a lot of education for our first responders. And as well as we're working with researchers to make sure that we capture our data and they interpret it and put it all out there, because again, want to work with the smartest people in the room, and that's why I have researchers to make sure I'm doing everything I can. So that's it about my program.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Raven, do you want to discuss the mediation response in Dayton with us?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I am Raven. I'm formerly with the City of Dayton mediation program. So I was a part of that development, creation, and implementation of the program. And I'm going to use the word, or the letters, the acronym MRU, for Mediation Response Unit. So we developed after a lot of different things in the news in 2020. Out of police reform, our mayor said, hey, we want to put some money behind this and really focus. So they looked at the police department, they made some recommendations, and one of the recommendations that they wanted was an alternative emergency response program that would respond to low emergent 911 and police calls for the city of Dayton in place of police. So all of I'll tell you in just a moment how we get all of those things. But our responders, they come from a variety of backgrounds. They're not all clinicians. Some of them are social workers and licensed clinicians, but others have experience in law enforcement, corrections, behavioral health services in the community, community response, community engagement, children's services, probation. So just a variety of backgrounds, and then also ones with lived experience as well. So we kind of combine those. And the teams, they respond in place of police. So if I call, and we respond to things like neighbor disputes, roommate troubles, barking dogs, parking complaints, anything that involves people in conflict or people in crises, but not weapons. So, and then of course, uh, we would show up just like police would be police or fire dispatched. Calls would come in through 911 or the non-emergency number, and our responders have computers in their cars, just like police and fire do. They're called the mobile dispatching devices. They have that in there. So any call for service that comes across for the city of Dayton, it comes across the computer. So there's a couple of ways. Either dispatch can say, hey, MRU, can you take the neighbor dispute on North Main? Or if police are on scene somewhere, they can call and ask MRU to come in place of them or replace them or come and co-respond with them. And then another way is our folks monitor those calls for service that come in across the city, and we can select those calls and pick those calls and self-dispatch to those calls. Not everything needs an armed response. And I foresee, and I think we've talked about this over several platforms, is that I see a three-prong emergency response system happening across our nation as we continue to move forward. And that if your house is on fire, you're having a heart attack, you're going to get fire or EMS, right? If a crime is being committed, and we'll loosely use the words crime being committed, and an armed response is required, then we have our police. But what about all of the other things, all the calls for conflict, crises, quality of life things like the cars breaking down and the neighbors not getting along because their trash cans are facing east and not west? There's all kinds of different, you would be amazed at what people call the police for, right? And then COVID happened, so there wasn't anyone but our police and fire. So just keep that in mind. People call the police for anything and everything. So our responders respond that way. We also have an alternative number, so that if some folks aren't willing or wanting or able to call the police, they are able to call us directly and we can respond directly. In addition, we do follow-up. So like if police went on 24 behavior or mental health calls yesterday, we are going to follow up with those types of calls. So we do follow up and connect to resources. Um, the city of Dayton also has a grant that was received in which it enables us to have case management and follow-up services and kind of follow folks along their little their journey in life. I know we talk about like alternative response is amazing, not just for the community and the police, but for the actual recipients of, like, we're talking like micro level, the folks on the ground, like I'm calling 911. Then we're talking about the community as a whole. And then we're talking about building these types of programs across the nation. This is amazing work. The city of Dayton was involved with Law Enforcement Action Partnerships, which is a national organization that works on different topics in this realm. So we work very closely with them. As far as training, initially when our teams started, they had like a 6 to 7 week training program that is now a full-blown 12-week program, it's kind of like a mini academy like police would go through, but our responders go through that. And we ask our police and fire and EMS and folks from the community agencies to come in and help train our responders, so they have a plethora of information and just a wide variety of resources and things to provide to those that we are. Initially, everyone was very apprehensive about unarmed responders going in. We got lots of feedback. Oh, you're going to get hurt, you're going to get killed and things like that. But you would imagine what it's like when you take away a badge, a gun, and a vest, and you send someone into a place. They're like, please come in here and help me. And well, let me introduce myself. No, my son, he needs you. Like, this isn't, I don't care who you are. Come in here and help us out. So it's been great to see the community at first was like, a little, and even the police were leery, like, you're taking our jobs. Nope, we're not taking your job, sweetie. Nope, this was our job initially, but now you're getting called for those kind of things. So it also alleviates. And then as you shift along this program, you've seen the continue where going from, I don't know, to, hey, MRU, are you available? Can you come over here and help with this call? Hey, we've got this situation where this victim won't speak to police because of A, B, and C. Okay, let's show up. So we're showing up and you hear us on the radio now, and it's just been a really great collaboration. But we also walk that fine line because we don't want to be too much here or too much there. We need to make sure that we walk that fine line of neutrality, because what we're about are the people in our community and making sure they're safe and they have the correct and appropriate response when they're calling for help. So, yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Raven. That was really interesting. All right. So next, I think Maisha is going to talk to us about the Cleveland's Peacemaker Alliance in Cleveland, a violence interrupter program. Thanks, Maisha.
Thank you, Leah. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to all of my panelists for my Zoom panelists who spoke before me for sharing all the information that's happening all over Ohio. My name is Maisha Watkins. I'm the Executive Director of Cleveland Peacemakers. It's a grassroots community violence intervention organization that supports communities mostly impacted by gun violence. We work with victims, perpetrators, and survivors of gun violence and their families. Our goal is to work within systems that are supposed to be put in place to support people, but oftentimes continue to cause harm, to advocate for the individuals, families, and communities that we represent. To share just a little bit about me and how my work and personal life collided in such a crazy way. Today is the 3-month date that my cousin was murdered in the city that I live in. And similar to how we show up for other people and families who are impacted by violence, my team had to respond to the murder of my cousin on June 24th. And the work that we do at the hospital showed out in a way that I've never saw it or felt it before, where I had to alert my team with a priority call that a young man was murdered in the city of Cleveland. And instead of saying, please go and support this family, I had to tell my team, please come and support me at the hospital as my cousin was murdered. And so it allowed me to look at this work differently, as you feel like you know what people and survivors are going through. You provide this wide list of resources and supports to people and programs that can help navigate the grief that families are continuing to go through every day with everyday community violence in our neighborhoods, in our cities. But it's different. It's different having to watch your loved one, knowing that you dedicate all of your waking hours and even hours when you should be sleeping, to figuring out how to create safe neighborhoods, how to support families who are grieving the loss of a loved one or a child, or how to support community members who do not feel safe or supported by local police departments around what safety is and feel like. So a big part of my work shifted that day, as my advocacy has always been strong. It's just more personal because of the loss that my family and I experienced. And from that experience, seeing my cousin go to the graveyard every single day for the last 3 months crying since the burial is something that I could not have ever thought was the reality of people who have survived the loss of a loved one. So in what our work looks like after sharing that is that we work at both level 1 trauma hospitals, which are Metro Health and University Hospital in the city of Cleveland. There's a program called the Anti-Fragility Program that was developed by a doctor named Dr. Ed Barksdale, that because young people were dying due to gunshots in the city of Cleveland, that he created a program just to support GSWs, or gunshot victims, who were 18 and younger. And it has been a great program. And what that work looks like is that we work with the hospital staff. When we are alerted by the hospital trauma department, our team deploys there to address the most immediate need with that family or the community members. And sometimes when I say the community members, 150 plus people can be there, and my staff is supposed to support in ensuring that no one is going to jail due to very valid emotions and lack of support, and that the system is safe, right? A lot of people will come if it wasn't a successful target, to try to figure out how to continue the job there. And our goal is to keep eyes around the premises, to keep people who are there to support their loved ones safe. And then whatever the continuum of care looked like if life is lost or someone survived the wound, it's like, how do we support the family members that are impacted by that loss? Another component of our work is called core advocacy and support. And this is where we work with probation officers and judges to not further push young people into the system, and how to reduce recidivism and violations that can oftentimes hurt people who may feel safe carrying a gun, that aren't violent or criminal, but now are being labeled as such. And how do we help with cognitive behavior interventions to help shift that component and give them what they need to figure out what safety looks like for them without pushing them further in the system. And lastly, we have a program called Safe Passage, where we partner with CMSD schools, which is Cleveland Municipal School Districts, and now entertaining the thought of helping other municipalities that borders Cleveland, because violence has no borders, and the communities that are now being the most impacted by gun violence doesn't even have protocols or procedures on how to handle this, because their community violence wasn't gun violence. It might have been something else that people might have felt a little bit more safe with, but now that students and residents are being impacted by police violence or community violence or gun violence and suicide, now the urgency is there, but the support and the resources aren't. So really being a thought partner on how to support neighboring cities in Cleveland, how to advocate and work alongside our mayor, our county executive, some of our state representatives. We do have a really aggressive and committed state representative, Daryl Brewer, who is really committed to making for the state of Ohio on gun violence a public health crisis, and figuring out how to align all of us on this call to figure it out. When we were prepping for this call, we're not as advanced as other cities in Ohio as it relates to a co-responder model, but that is something that we dream about. Cleveland does have a co-responder model, but it does not include violence interrupters or outreach workers or community violence intervention organizations. What it does include is an organization called Frontline Service, utilizing mobile crisis to be able to deploy. So what people are used to or believe to be true based on dominant culture and media, that community violence is really specific to mental health and substance abuse, where there's a lot of interpersonal conflicts that can lead to the trigger being pulled, or any other form of community violence that also needs to be addressed. I think sometimes when people think about gun violence, they think about gangs, when it's really as simple as, if Madeline and I have an issue and it goes unresolved, and there's no one to help de-escalate the situation, that if I choose to use a weapon to end this because it's too much, that a gun will be put in place. People will first ask, well, was Madeline and Maisha in the gang? Like, what was the problem? The problem is that they have very limited skills, or choose not to utilize the skills to help diffuse a situation that can save a life. So Cleveland Peacemakers really focus on life-altering interventions to be able to diffuse what people see as disrespect. People can't go to jail for disrespecting one another, but people absolutely can die for disrespecting people. So our goal is really how to allow law enforcement to depend on us in a complementary way, where we're not trying to do their job and they for sure can't do our job, because communities that we work in are triggered by law enforcement. However, if they trust us with the part of their work that they don't need to respond to, and we can, to provide prevention or intervention, it can be a cost saving, an energy saving, an image saving. There's so many advantages to allowing people from community who are credible and suitable and reliable and dependable to respond to situations that does not require force or incarceration. We want people to be alive and free. And I think if we're trusted enough to allow our lived and shared experiences to do that, that Cleveland can have a co-responder model that can be duplicated or replicated from cities that are on this call, but we aren't not there yet. But it's not because advocacy haven't been done. One thing before I stop, I just graduated from the inaugural class of the Community Violence Intervention Leadership Academy that is outside of the University of Chicago. And then what it is a cohort of people from all over the country who is working in the field that I do, which is community violence intervention. But they have a sister program that educates law enforcement on how to work with organizations like myself to better understand that people who may have been on the other side of the gun, who may have been gang affiliated, who may have caused damage, are now going into communities, or have been for almost 30 years. I don't want to say this as if it's new, but have been risking their lives to help save lives in community. that despite their worst decision, that they are more than willing to do whatever it takes so that a young person does not follow the path that they have that will lead them to either be incarcerated for majority of their life, or even worse, another data point on our metric system of calculating fatal or non-fatal shooting. So that's the work that I do. I'm looking forward to learning and listening, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for that overview. That was really great. Thanks. All right, so last, Madeline, who is with March for Our Lives, is going to give us an overview of what March for Our Lives does, but also sort of a little bit more of like an undergrounding policy wonk perspective on how these programs sort of get funded or operate. Thank you so much. And then also for all the listeners, if you are having questions for the panel or questions for specific people, you can put that into the Q&A tool. If you look at the bottom of your screen, there should be a thing that says Q&A, and you can click on that and write in your question. All right, thanks, Madeline.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Madeline. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the state policy manager at March for Our Lives. Excuse me. March for Our Lives is a national youth-led gun violence prevention organization that was actually founded following the mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. And what my role looks like at March for Our Lives, I'm the state policy manager. As I mentioned, I lead all of our state and local work. So a lot of that includes working with the different types of organizations that we see here today in a bunch of different other states, as well as state legislators and different local community leaders. My personal background is in holistic approaches to gun violence and alternative community safety strategies. But like I mentioned before, much of our work involves advocacy and communicating with local leaders, state legislators about all the amazing work that community organizations are doing. Like the organizations in the room, Zoom room here today, to reduce violence in their communities. And I think Maisha brought up a great point of how different that can look like, whether it's a community violence intervention organization or immediate mental health responders, things of that nature. So my role is kind of connecting those organizations with their state legislators, helping them communicate with county or city officials and things of that nature. And a lot of those conversations surround funding and making sure that there's consistent funding. Within the past few years since COVID, a lot of community organizations have been pretty reliant on the American Rescue Plan dollars to keep their organizations afloat. And now that those funds are starting to starting to run out, a lot of my work is kind of looking at what federal funds are available or what state funds are available that people just might not know about. So one of the biggest asks our organization is behind is creating an office, a statewide office of violence prevention. And that would be an entity that would kind of take the place of some of the things that organizations like myself do in terms of connecting local community organizations with different funding streams and opportunities. Statewide offices of violence prevention would be able to be that kind of middleman to help support city officials or local community organizations get connected to that federal funding and different funding streams and kind of provide that technical support that we try to do here at March for Our Lives. So I'm happy to be here on this panel with so many amazing people doing so many amazing things across the state of Ohio. I don't think I mentioned this, but I'm actually based in Cleveland, Ohio, born and raised, originally from Akron. So that's kind of my connection to everything here. But thank you all for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so we have one question that came in from L. I hope that I'm saying your first name right. And I think this is a really, really smart question because you'll notice, thanks, L, that everybody here is representing cities, even if it's sort of a continuum of city sizes. So L asked, I'd like to know if anyone has seen this work happening in rural communities in Ohio or otherwise. And she thanks everybody for sharing. So, of course, every single person does not need to answer every single question. That would take a really long time. But maybe if like 2 or 3 people have any thoughts on this, like if you do know of this happening in of programs in more rural areas, I also agree that like I'd love to know the answer to that. Thanks.
I do know of one county, I can't say it out loud yet because they're still in their initial stages and preparation, but there is a county in Southeast Ohio that's very rural, that's working on
Raven, we're having a hard time hearing you.
An alternative or a community response program. It's not up and running and it's not official yet, but yes. And just to comment, municipalities. Okay, sorry about that. They're like, okay, so you can't have 12 people. That's fine. Sometimes it's only one person or two people that is embedded in the system at some point. So it doesn't have to look like all of our programs. It can look like every community is different. And even the smaller communities having one clinician or one social worker or one or some peer supporters and things like that. Those are possibilities too. You don't have to have this giant multi-million-dollar program, but if you start somewhere and get the conversation started, that's how these programs with each of these awesome people in their programs, that's how they start.
Thanks. Anyone else want to chime in on that question?
I would say I've had challenges engaged in the rural community because they see gun violence as being something a lot different than inner cities do. And because of the stigma associated or around community violence and the way that I work into it, the preventative part of it isn't something that's always considered. And my way of trying to show that this is a very fluid problem is that domestic violence and firearm by suicide or community violence is all utilizing a weapon that if the skills are needed to help prevent and save a life is really important. So I think it's about language to show like where there is a need for prevention and intervention to happen, because what happens oftentimes behind closed doors, which is in households that is trying to be brushed under the rug, eventually spills out into the community. And I think that the idea with rural communities is that because it's oftentimes not gang on gang violence or rivalry violence, that they look at community violence as looking and being different. But I do think that it's a conversation worth having. Oftentimes when people think about community violence, they think about Black communities and Latinx communities, Black and brown communities. And when you don't see yourself as being a part of the problem, you can't see yourself as creating a solution for it.
Elle, I just want to jump in and say this really quickly. If you know of a small town somewhere in Ohio that's looking for some type of respite or some type of programming, have them reach out. Just to what Maisha said, gun violence is gun violence, whether it is police involved or whether it is weapons of service people that are left unintended, it's all violence. So have them reach out, don't have them speak up and not hold it in. That would be my last thing to say.
Thank you so much. And also if like one person asks a question and someone else has a thought on that question, feel free to like, put in your own answer to that. Someone here may know about a program that we don't. So Darnell asked a few questions and I might ask them in sort of phases. So one question that I actually was sharing and I think is a really interesting one. So I'll start with it is for the people who are training responders, right? Like peer style responders, is there an accreditation or a certificate or some sort of like specific program for that? And like maybe how did you come to that program? We've thought about the same thing in Columbus with a potential non-police crisis response.
I can talk about Cincinnati's programs, and it's something that we're trying to figure out and refine as well. We started our ARC program with a licensed clinician paramedic paired together team model. But as we expand to community responders and the program gets bigger, that's not going to be our one-size-fits-all approach. And we know that there are particularly with clinician licensure, there are a lot of systemic barriers to people getting that licensure. And to have a program with responders that are reflective of our community, we're not going to find that if we have a completely clinician-based type of program. And so we want to have something when, yeah, I think Raven was talking about kind of the third pillar of safety in the community, something kind of alongside our traditional police and fire departments. People are coming in from the community and being trained to be firefighters. And we want that same kind of model in this alternative response world. We want people who have graduated from our high schools and our communities to be able to get a job as a community responder and learn that job. So we're, in some senses, we're building the plane as we fly it. As we bring on these community responders over the next couple months, we've kind of mapped out some different things that we want them to train in. There's some classes that we have done with our clinicians and with our 911 staff, like crisis intervention training, mental health first aid. There's some mediation courses. So we're kind of, just trying to think of all the different things that we'd like them to have a certain level of skill in, and how we can build that into a program. But we don't have near as what it sounds like as developed a training program as what Dayton has evolved into. And it sounds like that was an evolution for them as well. So yeah, I'm really interested to learn from other communities as we hear about their programs too.
Raven, did you want to chime in on the Dayton program?
Sure. So if you just want to know what it's included, we were trying to reach out to one of our community colleges to see if perhaps we can work with them to provide a certificate for our responders. That's a future goal. It hasn't been something that we focused on yet. And just like Bill was saying, sometimes there's barriers to those types of things. So we want to make sure that we provide, or there's equitable access for these positions as well, because we want people to reflect our communities, right? We want us to show up to our challenges. So that's what, but the curriculum that I developed through the Mediation Response Unit, it's 12 weeks. It's a pretty comprehensive one. It includes 40 hours of mediation training, 40 hours of advocacy training, and then community resources. We also do defensive tactics and situational awareness with our local police and fire, just in case we're not doing like takedowns. It's if we need to get out of something, how do we get out of it kind of thing. We do radio training. We shadow our dispatch. We shadow our police. We shadow our EMS and fire. We bring in people that are experts in working with the LGBTQ plus community, working with underprivileged populations, working with our unsheltered populations, our deaf and hard of hearing, limited English proficiency. Let's get some training on, hey, how do I access X language if this is what their primary language is? How do I make that happen? Things like first aid, CPR, first aid, wound care, just in case we arrive. People, there's lots of things going on out there. And then of course, how we do referrals and our community partners and things like that. So it's a pretty extensive training, and we're hoping at some point we can get one of our local community colleges to provide the ability for people to get a certificate in that. So I'm hoping that will come along.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to chime in on that briefly? All right. Oh,
I
yeah,
can just add a little bit. So I think in regards to like this structured idea, I think it's like our program kind of started out as like this co-responder model, and then it kind of shifted to this alternative response, and then it shifted into dispatch. And so it's kind of hard in the sense that, yeah, we want this model that we can say we can follow, but I also love the flexibility that I can take pieces, because what I do in a suburban community is not going to work the same as it does in a larger metropolitan community. We're not going to work the same. The same way as the east side of Cleveland and the west side of Cleveland, they're going to need two different, maybe they need a little bit of a different response, or Northeast Ohio and then Southern Ohio. And so it's so hard to say, like, yeah, it'd be great because I think it would help and maybe save us all a few gray hairs that I didn't have to learn the hard way. But it's also at the same time, I love the flexibility that we can take from programs and what other people are doing, and like, oh, that I think will work for me. And I've done that a lot. A lot of people in this room I've definitely taken ideas from. It's like, oh no, that's great. And so it's so hard to be like, yes, I would love more of a structured idea model, but at the same time, I love that I can take from so many other places. And so that's just what I wanted to add.
Thank you. I wanted to, so the Darnell, who is apparently our state rep, Darnell Brewer, thank you for driving in and listening in on this panel. He had one other question that I thought, well, it's sort of a couple questions, but I want to compile them for you guys, but I think is a really good one. So what pushes there for funding these models on the state level, if any? Like, do you guys know about state level funding? And then I think tied to that concept of funding is also like, how do you decide what specific model is the right model for your community? And you guys are representing like really diverse models that are actually addressing different types of moments for different community members. And so how do we think about sort of like what is the right model to maybe not there's only one for your city, right? But like, how do you figure out which model to start with, that there is political momentum for a specific model? How do you sort of click your idea into the larger structure that's already going on? So funding wise, but also sort of political momentum wise. Thanks. And anyone wants to answer, please just feel free.
Well,
So
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I think that I can share from like CVI, because we do not as of yet have the model that everybody else is speaking about. But even when you think about traditional outreach or men and women who have utilized their pain and turned it into passion to interrupt the violence in our community, most people are hesitant to invest in people because they believe that redemption isn't possible. But what I do want to say is that an organization like with this University of Chicago, the Community Violence Intervention Leadership Academy, we are figuring out ways to diversify and to invite academia into the work that people on the ground have been doing for many, many years. That way, when we're going into these boardrooms or to the state level or the county level or the city level, we'll be able to have the data that oftentimes was not collected to be able to advocate and share how much does it cost to operate a program like this that was usually built on the backs of volunteerism, now is being done as a professional workspace, similar to other frontline workers, including but not limited to law enforcement. And so having this university back, one of the greatest universities in the country, to back a body of work like this has been really, really important. So much so that they were able to go to the White House and advocate for money to invest $500 billion over the next 5 years into this type of work specifically. And if you pay attention to like Live Free USA, which is a national organization, they came to the city of Cleveland and to say it's only 1% of the population that are committed to being violent, and as it relates to gun violence. And if you invest in that 1%, Cleveland has 300,000+ people. It takes $10 million a year to invest into this body of work. When people think of $10 million, they're saying like, how do you justify that this investment is stopping people from dying? But it's only our body of work that has to defend our budget, right? When you think about law enforcement having to go to the table, whatever their goals are, they're not asking to defend how many times did you respond, how many arrests did you make. But in this body of work, it's like you need to defend everything that you do in order for us to invest. And one more data point is that usually the cost of violence, a homicide is around $1 million per homicide. A non-fatal shooting is $1.6 million. So when you talk about investment, even if an organization like Cleveland Peacemakers saved one life, you have your return on investment because it's saving taxpayers $1.6 million, and for all of the non-fatal shootings, 1.6 million per non-fatal shooting. So I think it's just being able to talk about it in a way that too often they're looking for people to volunteer. Like, why don't you just volunteer for your work? Because it's community work, not community service. And the people that put their life on the line in this body of work should be paid well and should be incentivized for all of the things that they're doing to save lives that can lead to shootings, whether fatal or non-fatal. So the ultimate number for Cleveland is $10 million a year of an investment to this body of work. And we are nowhere near that. We have a neighborhood safety fund that offered $10 million over 10 years. That is a great investment, but that's $1 million to fund several different organizations. And like I said, one homicide is $1 million and a non-fatal shooting is 1.6. So we have to be more preventative.
Thanks. Anyone else have a thought on that?
Let me just speak for Cincinnati real quickly. I think out of our particular model, since all of our reforms, in which are global across the police force, not based on an individual case, police force, so that is the entire force and it is entire operations and the reduction of its violence tied to performance, tied to discipline, tied to hiring. It's just tied to a lot of stuff in our model that we did in the year of 2001. And so as you, we placed all this back into the government, into our city manager's office, because we have a city manager form of government, because one of the things that the Black community didn't want to do was worry about how the reforms would be paid for. And so while we don't have the particular model that most of everyone else is talking about, what we do have is a model that is in this rests inside of our city government, inside of our 911.
Thanks so much for that. That's really helpful.
It's just a headache I did need.
Yeah. There's two other questions, but because I'm about to hop off, I'm going to use my facilitator prerogative to ask a question of my own, and then I'll, after I listen to you guys, I'll hop off and pass it to Pete. So I'm wondering, I think from a researcher point of view, like I'm always really interested in whether programs, any programs in the US, but particularly this area of program is being evaluated. And with that, I really mean like quantitative or qualitatively, right? Like in terms of data and comparing like what happens if you answer compared to what happens when a police officer's, or in like focus groups with people, like, you know, what was your experience with this, like combined compared to other times that you had this experience. So I'm wondering to what extent any of you guys have really brought community voice into talking about the effectiveness of these programs, or as in one example I know actually partnered with people or yourselves, sort of tried to gather data that spoke to the difference when you answered these calls versus when you didn't, or when somebody else did.
I just want to echo that that's definitely a concern of my part. So our expansion is very new, and that's why I'm working with researchers to ask these questions. So that way we can make sure, like I have, you know, that people can leave us a review and have remarks. But I definitely agree that that's definitely needed. I definitely feel like it's important. So I just want to echo that. I think it's important.
Thanks. Yeah, Maisha, do you have a thought?
So I think like just speaking from my body of work, right? Like when working in Black and brown communities, earlier I mentioned that in some of these communities, they're triggered by law enforcement. So allowing us to show up in spaces where we can provide intervention or prevention, for sure they know if a peacemaker show up, their chances of going to jail is limited. In communities where police violence is high, their chances of losing their life due to an interaction or with law enforcement is limited. So being able to address the most immediate need, like if we're thinking about, and I can share just something to paint the picture, if there's a young person that was at the store hungry and he gets caught stealing 2 items that match, would you, if it's cereal and milk, will you call the police to put him further into the system, or would you provide a resource to meet the underlying issue, which is food insecurity? And so in situations like that, it costs more to incarcerate a young person than it does to give them the needs and the resources to feed the issue. Like I'm stealing because I'm hungry. I'm not stealing because I'm violent or I'm criminal, but yet you put me in a situation where now not only am I hungry, but my mom or my father or both parents have to leave work to come to court over an issue around food insecurity. the social determinants of health in communities like Cleveland leaves people hopeless to the point of like, if I don't have food, if I don't work, if my housing isn't safe, if I don't trust law enforcement, like what hope do I have? And oftentimes the attitude of doing anything necessary to fulfill a need is criminal or violent, or may lead you in a situation where you're put in the system, or you may lose your life due to any choices that you made to fulfill an unmet need. So the goal is not to call law enforcement for things that community can help solve by just investing in these communities that are the most impacted by violence, instead of sending law enforcement who are already frustrated, who might have already had a bad day, who are already over policing these communities. And then they're saying, you know what, this is my 5th time seeing you need to go to jail because you're hungry. You need to go to jail because you're homeless. It's just like, yo, let's just put the money where the problems are. Like, instead of trying to further put them into the incarceration system. So that would be an example of what prevention and not a reaction to. You're reacting to somebody being hungry, therefore you may put them into a system or give them a fine that they can barely afford because they can't even afford cereal and milk. So what do you think they're going to be able to afford court costs for? So that is a picture that I can paint of how oftentimes everything happens before they pick up a gun. And if we continue to overlook the unmet needs, then we're going to continue to have a system that's more reactionary than preventative.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna hop off and I'm gonna let Pete take on the rest of this thing. Thank you guys so much. And I'm sorry to miss the very end of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Leah, for doing such a good job here. There's a few things going on in the chat, and I saw a hand raised, but I wanted to stick for a minute, stay with Rep. Brewer's question, multiple question. In terms of funding, so I would love to hear from Madeline a little bit about what you're doing in different states and that we might think about here in Ohio as well.
Yeah, so what we're working on here at March for Our Lives, we're part of a community safety working group, which is a collective of other national organizations. And within the next few months, we're working on launching a campaign that is focused on creating a statewide version of the People's Response Act, which was introduced by Representative Cori Bush on the federal level. And some key aspects of that bill are creating reliable funding for community violence intervention organizations and these alternative community responders, creating a place to kind of house and hold them and organize them, which would be something similar to an office of violence prevention under, a city's or a state's Department of Health and Human Services. That's been a really important push of ours in the whole Office of Violence Prevention spaces, to make sure that it is kind of separated from the justice system, and we're looking at gun violence and community violence as a public health issue. So that's just a few things about the State People's Response Act that we're currently advocating for. But what we're doing as a part of this campaign is kind of getting all the nitty-gritty details in terms of model bill language, toolkit information, things of that nature, to organizations like the organizations we have here in the room today across the country in different states that are interested in bringing this legislation to their own state legislators, and just kind of supporting organizations that want to take, all the research and the information that we have to make these things happen. But I just really want to emphasize what kind of makes this funding happen is just the continued advocacy and support from community members and community organizations. And even if you're not a part of a particular community organization, just your advocacy as an individual and communicating with your city, local leaders, as well as your state legislators, is something that, that they remember. Bother your legislators as much as you can and let them know how important the work that the community organizations in your neighborhood are doing. And that's been the most effective thing, I guess, from our perspective, because we're really good as young people to keep our neck on these politicians, make sure that they're doing what they can to genuinely make our communities safer. So that's what we're kind of working on right now.
Thanks, Madeline. I would love to, Rep Brewer, you had a couple of questions in there about, and you mentioned your House bills that you have, and I'm clicking.
Pete, I had a follow-up too, but I'll wait after Rep. Pearl
Yeah, I
comes.
saw that.
Yeah.
I'll go get to that. I'm sorry, I'm kind of moving the order around a bit, but I'll get there. So, Rep Brewer, if you have a minute to talk about your bills, just real quick. I see you're unmuted. There
Now
you
can
go.
you hear me? There I
Yes,
am. I'm
yes.
sorry. Thank you. House Bill 420 and 421. One will do exactly what kind of Madeline Cobb was talking about, designated office here in Ohio to deal with violence prevention under the auspices of the Department of Children and Youth. That's why I have it under the bill. And the second one was for the governor to reinstitute the Gun Violence Task Force Committee that he had when he was lieutenant governor. So those are just two bills. Thank you, Maisha, for recognizing my work in trying to name gun violence as a public health issue. So that's part of that too. And the third piece of that bill is funding for organizations for like everyone on this call. So that bill calls for funding. It's funded the Finance Committee. We had our sponsor testimony. We're looking for our second hearing. So it's funding for programs like yourself who do boots on the ground. It's actually in the bill, boots on the ground work. So it's a big push to try to get funding for you all. So those are my two bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep Brewer. So yeah, and I see we're gonna kind of move back around then. So Bill Vidra answered the question from Emily about Sarah. Sarah is a model of problem-oriented policing standards for scanning, analysis, response, assessment. And we'll put that in the chat just to make sure everybody sees it. And Iris, you said you had a follow-up.
I do. SARE is the foundation of our collaborative agreement. And so I didn't want to just leave it to the responsive bill. I wanted to give you all a 25-year back look at what SARE was. It is the foundation and the philosophy of how we've changed policing, the way that the science of policing in the city of Cincinnati. SARE is an acronym and it stands for Scanning, Analysis, Response, and Assessment. And the first part of SARE when you scan is what is the problem? How do you identify it? It's just making sure that everybody who wants to be part of identification of that problem is in the room. The second piece to SARE is analysis. You analyze the problem. You take a closer look. Examples, do you need to redefine what the problem? Do you need to collect more data? How do we respond? And it goes on from there. Then the third letter is NAR, response, responding to the problem. Do you not respond until analysis is complete? Can you use your analysis to tailor your response to the specifics of what everyone at the table said the problem was? And then the last piece to that is the assessment piece. And then what does that mean? And what impact did the response actually have to your first question around data? What could have gone better? What is the sample indicators that include the problem? And so what I wanted to say also in addition to that is since we've been using SARA in the city of Cincinnati, what we have learned is when we used this and we began this process, what the Black United Front wanted to do was to reduce harms of police contact and begin to rebuild those relationships. And the key is reducing. And since Cincinnati has been using SARE, we have reduced arrests by 54% since the signing of the collaborative in federal court in the year of 2001. In 2004, our Cincinnati Police Department used force 1,067 times. In 2020, they used force 458 times. So we know that when we use SARA, and that when our police use SARA, and the communities use SARA, and all city departments use SARA, then the response can be different. And it not only can it be different for the system, but more importantly for the people who are impacted by very negative forces. And since, this is my last point, since the use of SARE, since we signed our collaborative agreement, Cincinnati is at its lowest level ever of use of force. And so that was our goal then. And I just wanted to give a more detailed example of how we globally look at all these issues that everyone else is currently looking at. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Pete.
Yeah. Any
And I
follow-up?
also, Bill, but I did want to follow up to Madeline and to the rep that was on the phone. If we don't vote correctly, all of this goes away. So it is more than just organizing. It's organizing around who is representing us, because money can go away. And since I think I'm the grandma on the team, again, when I said that we didn't want that to be part of our headache, we thought we'd just put it back where it belonged, inside of our city manager's office. Thank you, Pete.
Great, thank you. A real life Sarah, who is in the chat, asks, thank you for all the work you're doing. How can community members be of assistance to your programs or help influence in lowering community violence? So anybody who wants to answer that?
Read it one more time, Pete. I want to make sure my old ears heard it correctly.
How can community members be of assistance to your programs or help influencing lowering community violence, to help lower community violence?
My first response to that is always join your community council and know what's going on in your city. Know what's going on being in your town. Being a citizen requires work. I heard you, my used to say doing community work is not community service, and you're right. Folks should be paid for doing that. But for those who do volunteer on community councils and alike, you should be joining those to understand what is happening in your community. And then you can find out, we all should be plugging into those particular areas as well.
And just to add to that point is that, and I don't know if any other city, but Cleveland is a very transient city where people are moving from community to community. And I think the concept of being neighborly has been lost. And a lot of people believe whatever is happening outside of their home isn't their problem until it makes it to their doorstep. So just figuring out how to be more engaged in community. But we have a lot of community members that are afraid of the communities that they live in. Therefore, they can't figure out how to support or be a help. And so whatever is like creating a sense of normalcy with the people first. And so that we have a better understanding of like the code of our community or the code of the streets, or, everything has a code of conduct. And I think until we can figure out how to create a sense of normalcy in communities that are the most impacted by violence, where your son would kill my son over a pair of sneakers, or whatever the case may be, over something that's extremely preventable, you're going to have a lot of people in community that are afraid. But for those who are not, the biggest way to be a support is to come through a training and education service to keep yourself the most safe, to figure out what interventions are the most helpful, to figure out how your time and your talents or your money can continue to help advance or scale or to create a larger footprint or impact. And also another way is to be an ally, to do testimonials, to attend trainings, to, attend these council meetings, to advocate for the work that that we're doing. But really just to create a message that is worth hearing. Sometimes people read a headline and that's it, but like behind that headline is a whole family that's impacted by one bullet and one community, and that one bullet impacted a whole community, and that one bullet changed the whole school system or caused the grocery store to move out of community. And so it's like, it's bigger than a bullet, and we got to really figure it out how to be more intentional and less fearful. But when you work in spaces like gun violence, bullets have no name, and a lot of people are shooting with their eyes closed. Bullets having no borders, and sometimes it can feel like there's no safe space in certain communities that are free from violence. But even still, we have to show up because people's lives are dependent on us to advocate, to organize, to galvanize, to testify, to show up when your loved one is shot or killed, to try to reduce the chances of retaliation or a mental breakdown or even incarceration. So sometimes I feel like the option is just to do, but not to do it blindly. Definitely become educated and see if you have the capacity to work in a field of work that is full of trauma and triggers. Because whatever we do, no matter how much it hurts, you can never justify violence. And sometimes when you don't have the right skills, you can say, well, if that was my baby, I'll see why they did it. You can never say that. We just have to figure out how to stop the spread of violence from continuing, and education is important in that concept.
Does anybody else have anything to add to that question about how people can be helpful? I will say in Cleveland, they're starting the what we're calling care response in Cleveland, and there is a community engagement process over the coming year, and they're still working out the details. But that program just launched, and they're going to be trying to get members of the 2 zip codes, particularly people who live in those 2 zip codes of 44102 and 44105. And this is a program funded by the Adams Board of Cuyahoga County and run through Frontline Service in Cleveland. And they also run the 988 line. So it's calls that go through 988. So I would love to see that become, also part of 911, and we'll see if we can get there. But that community process will be open to the public, and that's one way Cleveland. Iris.
I hate to sound like a broken record, but if we don't vote properly, all of these things can go away. And so I'm encouraging all of us to encourage as many people as they can to make sure they're not purged. Ohio is purging as if it is, a pot of gold. In Hamilton County, there was over 18,000 people purged from the voting rolls. If we do not vote, these things will go away. So if you want to help us, make sure that the state rep has help at the state house, because they're in the super minority, so that they can continue to support the work that is being done across the state of Ohio. Make sure you encourage someone to check their status, their whole family, and then encourage them to actually go and do it. I hate to sound like a broken record, but that's how critical it is. And again, being a grandma on this call and watching how it ebbs and flows over the past 24 years, someone gets in office that does not support this type of work, it can all go away.
Thank you, Iris, for that reminder. There is one more question before we begin to wrap up. Advice for a group of people advocating for a program like yours in a community that doesn't have one. So if anybody wants to take that question on.
I can do it. I think the easiest way to do it is prevention, right? Like I mentioned in my previous comment, like violence does not have any borders. And just because it's not a problem right now, it can be. And what it would look like to support those who have been indirectly impacted by violence that's moving to a community for safety, but may not have the conflict mediation skills to handle if an altercation is to happen in community or in school or at work, that the option to choose a firearm is not used because they know that they have resources for community organizations. So what I would do is that I would take the closest city or community closest to you and look at their data around violence and how proximate it is to your community, because in Cleveland, communities are separated by one street. And you can be able to say an investment in this can prevent the city from paying $1 million if one life is lost. What if we put this $1 million into community to support those who are survivors of gun violence? Because if you center survivors, you can drastically see a reduction in fatal or non-fatal shootings, because we're caring for those who are the most hurt due to the loss of life to violence, and giving them a place to share. But I would say, just because it's not in your community, we can see on social media and news and any other outlet that violence is happening all over our country. So the chances of it coming to your community is very likely. And so investing in prevention and not waiting until it comes, I think, is the greatest way. But utilize the data of the neighboring cities or states that's closest to you that have already invested. One thing that I would say is that Canada have invested in a violence prevention strategy, and they very likely have gun violence, but they have people who have been victims of violence or perpetrators of violence. So also investing in those who have been system involved can drive down crime, because as a second chance employer, they don't have to go back to any lifestyle that once funded their life. And now they have a job that they can be proud of and utilize that pain and turn it into passion.
Raven?
Sorry, I turned my video. Oh, sorry. I did not mean to do that. The only other way, or I mean, everybody's had great suggestions. The other thing is someone mentioned get involved with your city council or your county commissioners or what have you. Get involved and know what's going on in your city. And that's vitally important, because sometimes they implement things that maybe we should have a little bit more of a say in. And if your community doesn't have a program like that, what better way to solicit interest than to bring that to those who govern your city, those that are who's supporting your city. Bring that to them. Get communities. You have to get the community involved and really rally people, get people to rally around what it is that you want to accomplish. Maisha and Iris both gave great, and Madeline too, gave great examples of how to do that. But getting involved is vitally important. When you see things that are happening and most people don't get involved until it becomes personal. So do that before it becomes personal. It's that preventative part, but it's also accountability. We're accountable for those around us, right? We're accountable for our community and for humanity, and that's a part of that. So getting involved, speaking up, and making things known.
Great, thank you, both of you, everybody. I think I'm going to start to wrap it up. I have some final words. Does anybody have any final thoughts you want to, from the panelists, you want to put in the chat, put in the space? Because we're getting,
Are you saying type it or say it?
no, say it. I mean, if you just have something that came up and you want to just say, answer
Yeah.
something or add on to
Yeah, I think what we have here, Pete, is a buffet of different responses to issues that either are currently going on or will occur in your community. And most of them are cost effective and cost savings. And if it doesn't save lives, it saves dollars. And a lot of cities and towns measure that. And I just want to say thank you for reminding me to get on here because my world is crazy as hell in Cincinnati. And I want to thank the young folk for being here. And young is relative,
Thank you.
right? But I appreciate all the models and all the work and seeing how you can intersect. And for those who are listening, there were nuggets of different pieces that you can get. Our model came strictly from our federal lawsuit against police because the violence was so damn tremendous and present. And we were paying for that by way of taxpayers. And so we wanted to change the whole apparatus of policing. But you see other models responding to violence and incorporating different things. Find a nugget somewhere. It is happening in your community, and find where you can utilize that to the greatest extent feasible. Everybody on this call is available. I don't know how many places I've been throughout the country, the world, talking about what we've done in Cincinnati. So I'm just more full of what is going on in Ohio. You all have made the old lady proud. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know Annette, you had done I mean, we need to start wrapping up, but you had done a cost analysis and showed that the program that you started in Shaker really has saved money, and that's not violence. I mean, the numbers you, Maisha, especially you've put out there are just, really powerful. But on a smaller scale, the money that's been saved by doing non-police response and some of the follow-up work is really impactful too for Annette, right? So, yeah. So I'm gonna say we're gonna wrap up. I just have a few more things I want to say, and Iris, you kind of summed it up. What's really exciting about this, as I said at the beginning, is like these are all these different kinds of programs. It's all about community stepping in, stepping up, and being able to do this work. There's so many other things I could say that I'm not going to because I know we need to wrap up. But I do want to say again, thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for everybody who's come just to listen and to learn and to ask questions. We'll be sending out a recording as soon as I can get that all going. It might take a minute. And also I'll save the chat, try to save the chat and summarize that. We'll have links. I'm going to check in with the panelists and see, in terms of your contact information, if we can share that or not. And so that's the main message. But finally, I do want to plug our November 19th panel. It's a second panel. It's at noon on November 19th. I'm going to share some links for that. We're going to be featuring Durham's Community Safety Department and Albuquerque's Safety Department as well. So these are two new departments that are doing from outside the state. They're doing this kind of work at different levels but have created their own departments. And I think that, to me right now, that feels like the gold standard. So there's this great podcast, but from the Marshall Project and Trade-Offs about the Durham Community Safety Department. So that's one link I'm putting in the chat. There's also I'm going to put the registration link in a moment, but this is the Durham website for their safety department. And then Albuquerque also has their own safety department. They both agreed. We haven't ironed everything out, but they both agreed to come on and do a panel on November 19th at noon. And it'll be similar, but it'll just be those two. and we'll be asking them questions. And we have the registration link for that. I'm going to put in the chat so that, well, if I can find it, here we go. And put that in right now. So please, check it out. Check out these links. Check out that podcast. It's very powerful. And I am typing and talking at the same time. So here you go. And with that, you'll be getting an email again with information, with the recording, with the chat, and also with the registration information. And please share it as broadly as you see fit. And with that, I will wrap up. Thank you all so much, and thank you for
Thank
being
you, Pete.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.